Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today, to help go through the hacking news of the week, we have my good friend and fellow hacker, Alex Lin. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So hello also to everybody who has joined us live in the chat. If you have any questions, we will try to read through them as we go on. But if you have any questions we don't answer, feel free to leave them on the YouTube video and we will make sure to answer them live on our weekly Tuesday stream where we do our Q&A. So we have lots of different news pieces to get through. Also, hello to Zam, and thank you for the news contributions per usual. And yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get started, huh?
Sweet.
So I'm going to go through some stuff that also I've just seen on Twitter. Let's go ahead and start over at mine. And I can't imagine how many people on this stream are personally impacted by this story. But if you were a member of the CryptoBatz NFT project operated by Ozzy Osbourne, as I'm sure most of us were, you might have fallen victim to a scam using a fake Discord vanity link. So do you know what a vanity link is on Discord?
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's just a specific link that has like a catchy name or something that makes it easy for people to like join the Discord community or whatever. Unfortunately, it looks as though this link was changed. But because they didn't do anything about the old link, it was just now vacant, somebody cyber squatted that link and decided to set up something else which would allow them to steal cryptocurrency from the old vanity link. So I'm so sorry to all of you CryptoBatz fans that might have potentially gotten your cryptocurrency stolen by this, but cyber squatting URLs, especially old ones, is a very, very old trick. If somebody vacates a URL that a lot of people know, and then especially if you are Ozzy Osbourne and you keep that link up on your Twitter. The problem here was like they decided to change the link at a certain point, but Ozzy Osbourne like still had these old links up in tweets that were being shared with people. So because of that, he was basically linking himself personally to these malicious campaigns that were trying to defraud people in this project from their cryptocurrency. So be careful of links, and if you're going to change links, make sure you delete all of your posts that are pointing to that old link. Or at the very least, maybe make sure that you still have control over that old link if you're still going to refer to it. Because when it comes to cryptocurrency, really anything of value, that is a very juicy and very easy target to just register that vanity URL.
Devastating attack on the CryptoBatz community.
I'm sorry.
Really sorry to hear.
Fortunately, Alex here got cyber insurance, so he's totally square and protected against this. But yeah, looks like a really bad day for a lot of CryptoBatz NFT community members such as ourselves.
Nice.
All right, we gotta move on, guys. I know that was a hard blow for most of our people on this stream, but something kind of interesting about Twitter, they got a lot of really positive press and a lot of kind of good reactions from the security community a while ago when they hired on a hacker, Mudge, who was well known in the hacker community, to be their head of security. That has now come to an end with a lot of people departing Twitter. The head of security is probably not a good sign, like to have leave the company so abruptly after the CEO. So stay tuned for exactly who's going to replace Mudge permanently as the chief of security, or head of security rather, but their CISO also left. So the chief information security officer is in charge of course, the policies across the entire organization. So seeing two security, like very high level security people leaving so quickly is definitely a kind of alarming sign. So a lot of people in the hacker community were not so happy about this. We'll see if his replacement is any better, but I seriously doubt it will be. All right, Alex, what do you got this week?
Cool. Over on my news, a Segway store, or rather the Segway store was hacked.
The Segway store?
Yes, the Segway store, the one that you see mall cops rolling around on, was hacked, and basically attackers put a skimmer embedded inside of a favicon that loads on the page. So this little, one of these Segway icons or another has like a embedded thing that's able to skim for credit card payment information. So when it loads, it's like obviously not detected since most browsers are like antiviruses or things like that. We'll just see this as like a regular image file. But once it actually finishes loading, they're able to decode JavaScript that's contained within this. And since the Segway site itself was compromised, they're able to just directly inject the skimmer into JavaScript. that then forwards this to whichever group this is.
Okay, so this group like had the ability to somehow compromise like the smallest possible part of the page, like the fave icon, and then like they ended up just embedding malicious JavaScript to be run to steal credit card information.
Yep.
Nice. Well, in some ways, I kind of feel like they might be doing these people a favor. Like if these transactions get canceled because of fraudulent activity, they might actually be saving lives. I mean, not to say anything negative about Segway Corporation and whatever entity it exists now, but I did hear that the guy that invented the Segway actually rode off a cliff from one, and died. So,
that's a pretty cool way to
cyber attack or cyber vigilantism. Who knows? Maybe someone's out there, and is the relative of the original Segway guy, just trying to make a buck and then also prevent people from meeting the same fate. Well, okay, that's pretty spooky.
Yeah.
All right, so over on my screen, if you were trying to do Portswigger Labs like I was a couple days ago, you might have noticed that wasn't possible because the entire website for Portswigger was down. Now, it doesn't seem like there was anything like malicious happening here, but a lot of people were complaining that they couldn't do their free online courses, which my response would be like, well, maybe you'll get a refund for those free courses. But while Portswigger was down, I went ahead and played around with Adafruit's CircuitPython in order to create a deliberately vulnerable web application that basically exactly mirrors some of the really fun labs that are available on Portswigger. So if you like CircuitPython, or if you happen to have a ESP32S2 based device like an Adafruit Feather or, I don't know, a Wi-Fi Nugget, then you could go ahead and follow along with this as well. I went ahead and posted the code here, so all you really need to do is put CircuitPython on your board and then just drag and drop the damn vulnerable nug onto your CircuitPython board, and it will go ahead and set this up. The only thing you need to change is the Wi-Fi credentials in the secrets.py file. Once you put your own Wi-Fi credentials in there, it will join your Wi-Fi network. It will pick a random username and password, so it's not going to be the same every time. You'll have to figure it out using some tools. And I provided a 60-second solution on how to do this on the video. So pretending to break into the Cat Fanciers Association. Of course, to anybody who's in the Cat Fanciers Association, I would never do that. I would never do that. But just for a simulation on a very spicy account that lots of people would be wanting to break into, I figured this was a good example. So as you can see, I just used Burp Suite to, okay, I guess that's as big as this is going to get. But I just used Burp Suite to very quickly cycle through a bunch of username guesses and then cycle through a bunch of password guesses in order to guess the username and guess the password by analyzing the responses. So if you want to learn a little bit about how this works and you have a CircuitPython device sitting around, then this could be a very cool way of having a free and totally legal to attack web application punching bag to try out some of these techniques. And honestly, coding this was really fun. It's easy to see how people will try to do something secure and just meet like very, very minimum expectations for it, and then end up introducing logic that's vulnerable to things like brute forcing. So a lot of fun to do, and hopefully if you guys are interested in web application pen testing, then this is something that could be a resource for anyone who wants to have, instead of like a remote lab that could crash for hours on end, a CircuitPython approximation of the same thing that allows you to test this in your own home.
It's also really cool that you can just like screw around with the web server that's running in CircuitPython too. So you can like make modifications for, I guess, other labs that you were doing through Burp Suite before.
Yeah, so like
it's just Python too, so it's easy to read and
so
follow along with.
I'm thinking about using the same kind of idea to do things for other labs that a Portswigger hosts. Like I was doing, what was I showing you last night? Oh, cross-site scripting. So if you wanted an example of like what a cross-site scripting attack would look like with poorly sanitized code, you could actually look at the code that's vulnerable and understand like what would be needed in order to prevent that sort of attack from happening. So yeah, I'm probably going to be doing more of these sorts of labs, like involving like cross-site scripting and some other things aside from just brute forcing. But it was a lot of fun to do. So you can check it out if you're interested. And of course, if you want to just try this stuff for free, you can always go to portswigger.net and check out the Academy. All you need to do is sign up for a free account, and then you're able to attack deliberately vulnerable applications for free, however you want. And the cool thing is our friend Arsenis actually solved all of this using just a little Python script, which I was super impressed by. So I'll probably end up covering that in a upcoming Hack 5 episode if you guys are interested. All right, Alex, over to you.
Sure. This blog was a fairly long read. I didn't even get through the whole thing, but this one was about recovering randomly generated passwords. And basically this write-up shows how randomly generated passwords, well, rather they did like a statistical analysis of what randomly generated passwords will usually use as like fields in order to generate them. So for example, you'll notice lots of random passwords won't have characters that are in consecutive order like this, or they won't have lots of values that repeat. So using like a really powerful web server, they were able to run a statistical analysis on common patterns that were generated from things like LastPass or other sites that create pseudo-random passwords. And they were able to generate like a hashcat function, which is a tool that's used for cracking passwords, in order to create a mask that allows them to have a better chance at cracking alphanumeric passwords that are of a fairly good length, up to like 9 or 10 characters. Yeah, and you can see they did stuff like character distribution in order to analyze which characters would have a better chance of appearing in certain positions within the password, and were able to crack various password sets with pretty good success, up to 10 characters. So this was a pretty interesting write-up.
That's interesting also because we were covering a couple weeks ago how some randomly generated passwords were being used to like log into like certain accounts, and like people weren't sure if it was like a vulnerability in the random number generator or what really was going on. But maybe it was just some sort of attack like this, where if they knew what kind of random number generator or random password generator someone was using in order to construct their passwords, you could tune your password attack to only go after the result of basically that algorithm. And if there's enough of a pattern there, you're at least cutting out enough wrong guesses that it's going to get you there a lot faster.
Yeah, this one was almost like entirely based off statistics. So they generated passwords that they thought wouldn't be like generated through a random password thing, like a password consisting of like all the letter A or like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutively, or stuff like that. And it like greatly cut down the amount of guesses they had to do.
Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over to my screen. And this is something that I saw in the news today, which is funny because I read about it 2 days ago. So I support Patrick Wardle on Patreon, so I get like an early look into this blog post before it hit the news. But there was a new piece of macOS malware called Dazzle Spy, which was being deployed primarily in Asia and Hong Kong, that uses a couple really interesting mechanisms to specifically go after macOS computers. And Patrick Wardle always does these really, really excellent write-ups. And for anybody that's interested in reverse engineering, not only does he have a free book on it right here, which I was starting to read last night, and it's really, really good. He also writes up these blog posts that include like samples of the malware and all sorts of other things for anybody that wants to get into reverse engineering. So if you're curious about this sort of stuff, then these write-ups are absolutely awesome. Reading about them on the news just really doesn't give you the full kind of look into like how cool this malware is and exactly what it does in order to be sneaky. So a couple cool things about this. First, there are tools out here that are free and easy to use that Patrick Wardle makes that will catch this malware. So I have a lot of these tools, such as What's Your Sign, and some of the other ones that we'll be coming across as we go through here, which kind of look for behavior that malware needs to do in order to succeed, stay persistent, connect to its C2 server, and tries to give the user as many chances as possible to detect and stop this behavior before it gets really bad. So on this piece of malware, just running the strings utility on it will pull out lots of different strings, including like a hard-coded C2 server that's where it's getting its command and control information from and where it phones home to in order to proceed to the next step or download some sort of additional module it was running. And what's cool about this also is the way that this spreads. So I think that Patrick also makes these really easy to understand graphs. Let's see if there's one here. Maybe not. So the way that this spreads is basically by targeting Safari like browsers instead of other browsers that don't have a couple of capabilities that make this malware really cool. When this is downloaded by Safari, or when a Safari website goes to a page that automatically downloads this file, it will also automatically extract it and try to run it, which doesn't seem like a great idea, but because this piece of malware is able to take advantage of this convenience feature that just exists on Safari, it's able to be particularly I guess, like easy to kick off compared to another browser or compared to another operating system. So it's just interesting to see these things that are built very specifically for Mac OS and for the type of browser somebody using the default configuration would be using. What I like is that these free tools, such as BlockBlock, were able to detect when this malware was starting up, installing a launch agent, which is obviously something that most software does not do, trying to connect to a random raw IP address, which is something that you obviously want to be alerted to. And then also, if you were looking through all the things that have been installed on your macOS computer, you can see that launch items, anything that gets a hit with virus total is probably not a good thing to have persistently launching on your computer. So this malware is not undetectable. It is novel though, and it's interesting the way that it's taking advantage of some Safari convenience features in order to be very, very well targeted towards the people it's going after that are using maybe Mac OS with all the defaults enabled. They're not using Firefox, they're just using the built-in browser. So pretty cool, and again, very comforting knowing that as this is being analyzed, the researchers also talking about the way that free tools can stop this in its tracks in 3 separate places. So all hope is not lost, but it is interesting to see that some of these well-targeted macOS pieces of malware are pretty difficult to stop if you don't know what you're doing. So pretty cool.
Apparently the Chinese government was actually using that malware. If we switch over to my screen real quick.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What's it called? Dazzle Spy malware.
Dazzle Spy, yep.
Yeah, but they're using it to target like people that are pro-democracy, and they've essentially injected scripts on various pro-democracy sites or sites that are at least purporting to be, but secretly belong to the government. And basically in one of the like startup loader scripts on this site, it will go ahead and reference another site that uses JavaScript in order to detect if the operating system is using Mac OS. And then if that's detected, then it's able to basically use a JavaScript stager to download this malware and then exploit the user's machine.
Yikes.
So yeah, real scary stuff.
Real scary stuff. All right, so this was something that Zam made sure I knew about last night. So do you know what Let's Encrypt is? Have you used it before?
No, I haven't.
What?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so Let's Encrypt is one of the easiest ways to set up SSL on your website. Does your website have SSL?
No, it doesn't. I use 000 web host.
Okay, all right, well that's why. So if you're someone that wants to have SSL on their website, then Let's Encrypt is probably one of the easiest ways to do it. It's free. It means you don't have to like pay for some like weird SSL thing. Like it's just designed to make it easy for people to use. Well, they had a little bit of a mistake, and because of that, they're going to need to revoke lots of certificates. Now, in this little bulletin, they say that it's going to be, what did they say, like less than 1%? Oh, yes, less than 1% of active certificates, but they have a lot of active certificates.
Oh, yeah.
That is still like a whole lot of them. So that is coming over the next several days, and yeah, potentially it means that any website issuing this certificate might have had the ability, or attackers might have had the ability to intercept or forge information or do other bad things because the certificate basically wasn't valid. It wasn't in compliance with the standards that are supposed to be set out for it. So this is very unfortunate for anybody who's using this certificate currently, because it means that their cert is going to expire and suddenly people won't be able to access the resources without getting a big fat warning on their screen when they try to go to it. So
Dang.
if you are trying to go to a website in the next couple of days and you just see a big error or like a warning saying the certificate's invalid, then you probably know why.
Now you see, if you don't have SSL enabled, you wouldn't have this problem.
Very smart, Alex. Very smart. Just get rid of the security mechanism entirely,
Yep.
and then we won't have to worry about it at all. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right.
Yep.
Well,
I think my site actually got taken down because I was having too much traffic and I was using a free web host, which sucks.
there you go. Instead
Yeah.
of worrying about SSL at all, just take down the website entirely. Then security, no problem.
Yep.
All right. What do you got next?
So this is a new malware evasion technique where essentially like C2 servers can be disguised by encoding the URLs in various ways. So this was a pretty novel technique in order to obfuscate how the URL is encoded. They basically encoded, wait, who did this? I'm not sure who did this. Oh, the people who deployed the Emotet malware. They basically encoded URLs with a combination of hexadecimal and also octet characters, and provided these escape characters when this URL is like read by an operating system or something, is able to correctly read through this URL, but if an antivirus or something else is trying to detect this, it won't be able to actually read these characters. So they can embed this in stuff like Excel macros or various other techniques in order to communicate with a C2 server.
And this is like designed to be just like really difficult for like filters, or is it designed to be like difficult for humans to read, or both, I guess?
I think just looking at this at a glance, you'd be able to tell that something is up with this, but I think it's more like filters that would have a problem reading this, because you can still see it's pointing towards an HTTP site, and it references this like .html page, but the middle part of this URL is like obfuscated with hexadecimal and octal characters. Yeah. But of course, when an operating system goes to read this, it'll see the escape characters for like which character encoding it's using, and we'll be able to execute this.
Yikes. All right, over on my screen, we have something that I've been taking a look at on Twitter for the last several days. And a lot of people have been confused as to why this is happening. And there's several theories in the security community as to why it's happening, but none of them at all are mentioned in this news story. So I saw earlier that there was somebody complaining that Google Drive had locked a file for them that said it was like a copyright infringement that had a single character in it, just the number 1.
Nice.
So for whatever reason, like Google like locked this down, and people got curious about like what other like evil numbers Google was going to have issues with. So they started creating various files that had just numbers in them, and they found that there was a set of numbers that were just bad. They didn't like them. So it was 173, 174, 186, 266, 285, 302, 336, 451, 500, and 833. So why these numbers specifically make Google so mad, it's very difficult to say. But some people in the security community were saying that Google probably thinks that this is like a C2 server. So Alex, how would that work?
Maybe a port or something? I'm not sure, actually.
What? A port?
Wait, a port number for the C2 server?
Bro,
I'm not sure how it would
No. Okay, no. So, okay, sorry. So a C2 server is generally something that a piece of malware would use in order to determine what its next instructions are. And frequently these are done using common infrastructure like GitHub in order to make sure it's, for one, difficult to attribute, and for two, difficult to blacklist the IP address that is hosting the malware. If you're running your own IP address that's just hosting malware, everybody can just blacklist that. But if you're using GitHub, then GitHub isn't going to blacklist itself. It's going to have to find out who's hosting it, shut down the account, and go through other processes that take longer. So there's frequently people who will use things like GitHub or Google Drive in order to have the communications relay of their malware in order to make it so it's a bit more difficult for somebody to shut down what they're doing. Now, of course, these platforms have to try to automatically detect this sort of behavior, so it's not inconceivable that files that are being generated with very short, like switch type data that would be able to trigger a piece of malware to do one thing or another might potentially be flagged. And that's what a lot of security researchers thought was going on here, that somebody was basically having a botnet check in with like a single document that might be just throwing a binary switch telling it to do one thing or another. This would be a pretty sneaky way of controlling malware, but obviously because of the protections built into services like Google Drive, they're looking for this sort of thing. And our friend MG thought that that's probably what was going on here, because there's just some sort of issue with Google thinking, hey, a bunch of bots all trying to access this could very well mean that this is a C2 server and we should just stop it in its tracks. But of course, that's not very useful for people that are like generating logs or otherwise like importing data into Google Drive and then having their data partially locked because they have a certain result that Google doesn't like. So the story went on to try to get comment from Google Drive, and so far what they got was this tweet that just said, "Hi, thank you for letting us know about this issue. The Drive team is very much aware of this now. Thanks to all of you, we're working on it."
That's helpful.
Right? Yeah, so we're not totally sure what's going on. Some other theories were a possible hash collision between copyrighted files and benign ones just that share the same hash. But the kind of notable thing about this is that it specifically said that a review was not available for this, so you couldn't request that anyone looks at it. It just instantly just locks it and makes it inaccessible for you. And if you get too many of these, it's possible that Google could also lock your account for repeated copyright infringement via an automated system. So again, this was a very, very confusing bug to have sprung on you out of nowhere, and it definitely upset some people who weren't sure whether like Google was just copywriting arbitrary things or if there was something else going on here. But my theory, I still think that like the C2 server theory is pretty probable because I know of some malware that does try to use services like Google Drive in order to check back and look for instructions on what to do next. So Google interpreting like very low level data that's just being put in a Google Drive like link. Maybe that's a problem, maybe it's not. I don't know. But it's still interesting to see that a single digit could cause your file to get locked and possibly your entire account to be locked for repeat copyright infringement.
I'll make sure to note those numbers and never put them in a doc then.
Yeah, the number 1. Okay, so this was also pretty spicy. Alex, did you read about this one?
I read a little bit about it.
Okay, so this was a bug that was lurking for a very, very long time, and it's being called PwnKit, I believe. Yeah, PwnKit. Sorry, no cats involved. That's
Thinking
sad.
too much about your nugget, son.
Yeah, so apparently this was first implemented in May of 2009. So this bug has been around for a really, really long time. And in this article, it says proof of concept expected soon. Soon is now, because this has actually already been released. Yep, an exploit proof of concept has emerged in the public space. So if you have a version of Linux, and I just mean like Linux, pretty much all versions of Linux that has not been updated, then you can just get root on it. How does that sound?
Wonderful.
This actually sounds like it would be a good
it's like a secret way to
ducky
sudo.
script payload.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should do an episode on that. You guys want to see this cool ability to just get root on any Linux system as a ducky script payload? Let us know, and maybe we'll do an episode showing just how this exploit works. Because this is obviously a really bad one. Root on any Linux system is a very, very bad one, especially if it's been around since 2008. So any Linux system from 2008 until now that hasn't been updated is vulnerable to this. I have not tried this myself yet because it just kind of came out. Hey, Will Dorman, did you know that back when I had a sketchy email address and was just like a young writer emailing people like kind of suspicious questions about cybersecurity, Will Dorman is the only one that replied to me with real information.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, to my
Seems cool.
.ru email address. But yeah, I love seeing him in news articles. Same with Patrick Wardle. But yeah, so this is just very nasty and is not good for anybody who has an old Linux system. And again, we'll probably end up like trying to show off how easy this is to use, maybe packaging it into like a ducky script, because I think this would be a very simple, very effective exploit to show off.
I think it works like having something to do with the pkexec function, which like is basically a thing that lets you like run other commands as sudo. And what it does is like looks for a path environment, telling it like where to run a certain script. But if you like blast it with like wrong memory addresses or something like that, it essentially like overflows and defaults to user ID 0, which is the root account. So in theory, it's supposed to be pretty easy to run, and that'd be cool to check out.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing, is that most people are just like surprised by how like simple and straightforward this is. So it's not exactly like log4j, but it is a problem if you have local access to a Linux system.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right. Let's go back over to you.
Sure. This one's about credentials that are mindlessly published on GitHub. We've seen this a lot. There's also like a lot of tools out there just for like scraping GitHub repositories for stuff like API keys or passwords or stuff like that. One of my favorite tools is GitRob, which is like a it's like a Go-based scraper for just like credentials or other stuff that are just published to GitHub repositories, which I myself have done by accident many times. But basically, a security researcher wrote a tool to scrape for Twitter API keys, and just made like a bot or something like that that retweeted his tweet over and over again from various accounts, 9.5K to be precise.
Whoa.
And yeah, it says something like, if you don't remember retweeting this, then make sure you check for your Twitter API keys. They're probably public, but I found that pretty funny.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Well, let's go over, speaking of drama on Twitter, if we go over to my screen, you might be seeing this article or these tweets being frantically retweeted today, but mostly not by security people. In fact, most of the security people I know are telling people to stop reading this and stop investing in this thread because it is not good research. This guy also has been the center of a bunch of sensationalized research that doesn't actually stand up to scrutiny. before. So if you're seeing this story, I mean, we talked about how there were privacy issues with the Olympics app like 2 weeks ago, like last week, like something like that. But this guy has gone through and has this big long thread on how it's like secretly analyzing your voice. But almost all security researchers I'm seeing who have taken a look at this are saying that this guy is looking at the translation part of the app that you have to like turn on and like start like talking into in order for that to run. So this is not like running persistently, secretly all the time and watching you. This is like kind of like a conspiracy theorist guy, like with just enough like computer science to be dangerous, going in and like looking at stuff and making like conclusions based on a flawed analysis. So if you have been reading this, or if you're a reporter who is trying to report on this, please talk to a security expert that you trust. Don't just take stuff that gets retweeted a bunch of times by people who are shocked by conclusions that might not stand up to reason. So yes, does the Beijing Olympic app have issues? It sure does. Is one of them the fact that it's secretly recording you and that it's got some sort of like ability to do this constantly? No, it's not. And you should stop retweeting this. And then if you already retweeted it, maybe just unretweet it before the blowback.
Maybe he should delete that.
Maybe he should delete that, but he won't. In fact, I've seen him doubling down, and like anybody that criticizes this, like he challenges them to reverse engineer it themselves. So like I don't have time for that. But I do have people that I trust who do this as a job and have gone through it and are not in agreement with the findings of this analysis. So I would tend to be very cautious before making assumptions when it comes to this particular researcher. All right, so one thing that I don't often see is governments releasing Nmap scripts to find vulnerabilities.
That is.
Like, what could be the bad side of that, huh? But apparently the vulnerabilities are so bad that the UK government is releasing some of these Nmap scripts in order to locate some of the worst offenders. So this is actually kind of cool, I have to say, because it doesn't rely on outside dependencies, and it seems like a relatively straightforward way of checking your system to find what an attacker would basically find, or what an attacker would be looking for. So it's pretty cool that this has been released, and I think that as an effort to get everybody into compliance, having an easy way of detecting the kind of vulnerabilities that attackers would be looking for is definitely a plus. And I don't think that there's really the issue of like attackers using this maliciously, because Nmap scripts are not exactly hard to find. And if you know what you're looking for, constructing one is not difficult either. So if you're an attacker that doesn't know how to write an Nmap script, or doesn't know how to at least load one that already exists, then I mean, I guess this will be a beautiful, wonderful payday for you. But for everybody else who can, watch like the tutorial I made on Nullbyte like 4 years ago, that's literally 5 minutes long on how to use an Nmap script, this is no big deal. So very cool for defenders and anybody who might be a little bit of a security newbie maybe, and like is not exactly sure where to start looking. Running an Nmap script that's specifically tuned to some of the worst vulnerabilities somebody could hit you with is definitely a good place to start. So this is a resource that anybody that's looking to remediate vulnerabilities should be aware of. And then I have to wonder if somebody was unhappy about the winner of the Nobel Prize because their foundation website got hit by a distributed denial of service attack on the day of the awards. So obviously this created some logistical issues, but mostly they were just hit with absolutely massive amounts of garbage traffic that was potentially from a state actor. So when you go ahead and maybe select someone that's standing up against oppression in like a country that doesn't want to be embarrassed by that, you might expect that they're going to ruin your news day when you're trying to put out a press release about how great this person is that's been poking holes in your theory of governance. So perhaps one of these countries that did not win, or didn't have someone from them that won, were upset about it. But either way, this is a pretty, when you're giving a prize that's pretty controversial, you do open yourself up and your infrastructure to potential attacks from somebody who might feel snubbed by that. And frequently we see these sorts of distributed denial of service attacks against like video game competitions and things like that. But seeing it used against the Nobel Prize is kind of a novel and interesting way that it's been used to disrupt some sort of ceremony.
Some poor country threw a cyber tantrum.
Yeah,
so
exactly. They were so upset. And in more successful distributed denial of service attack news, it looks like Microsoft's Azure denial of service protection platform mitigated a 3.47 terabit per second attack, which is absolutely massive. So I don't know if this has been attributed to a particular botnet, but that kind of
large.
seems, yeah, that is a big spike. But that seems very, very big. And then while they didn't exactly go into exactly like who was being hit by this, they did make the comment, gaming continues to be the hardest hit industry. The gaming industry has always been rife with the distributed denial of service attacks because players often go to great lengths to win. I think they mean to cheat. The concentration of attacks in Asia can be largely explained by the huge gaming footprint. So per usual, who is the most vulnerable of all people?
It's the gamers.
Yeah, the gamers are definitely the most targeted of all.
They're up there with the crypto community too now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That is good news for anybody using that Azure denial of service protection, because if it can stand up to that kind of attack, then that's a pretty good sign, because that is a massive amount of traffic, and you would need an absolute ton of devices in order to divert that much garbage traffic to a particular server. So, wow.
Dang.
Very spooky. So, all right, let's go into some more malware stuff. This one was notable because it was Lazarus, which is North Korea. And although they have another nickname I found down at the bottom that I think is, yes, Hidden Cobra
Dang.
by U.S. intelligence agencies. I feel like these dudes drink a lot of Monster energy drinks. I don't know why. I just like the names that they give to like state actors just makes me think they like slam a lot of like the green monster specifically. But anyway, so this group has added the Windows Update client to one of its kind of living off the land ways of trying to infect a computer. So what does living off the land mean?
It basically is when you use tools that are already installed on like a server or a computer that you've compromised in order to do stuff like exfiltrate data or whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Exactly. And at that point, you're kind of pushing it on security to not just look for like a malicious binary or something that's detected as a virus. It now has to look for suspicious behavior in its own tools that come default, or even that might be targeting default configurations of tools. So living off the land is a very successful technique because it means you don't need to bring your own malware. You can just abuse built-in features in order to take advantage of, whatever it is you need to take advantage of to pursue the next step of your malware, setting up persistence, maybe setting up a C2 server. So in this case, they were able to abuse the Windows Update functionality. So in this handy little graph here, you can see that what they would do is send a malicious document that would inject code into explorer.exe, communicate with the C2 server, and then it would drop a runtime broker.exe, which creates this .dll file. After, they also create the Windows Update configuration is it INK? Yeah, no, LNK. It would basically execute a Windows Update while pulling this malicious DLL into it, and then proceed to inject code back into explorer.exe. So this is a really interesting mechanism of persistence and being able to use a built-in feature to load a malicious DLL file and get around antivirus. So by using the update feature, they were able to basically evade executing, they were basically able to make the Windows Updater execute the file rather than executing it themselves. And because that didn't go through any sort of check, that made them a little bit more able to evade the protections that are built in to catch this sort of attack. So that's pretty cool. And as you can see, what were they using as a C2 server?
GitHub.
A GitHub repository. So you can see that like it's very, very common for these sorts of attacks to be as generic as possible. Like if I was looking at this and I was like, all right, who did this? Well, they used built-in tools and a commercially available, code hosting website. It's very difficult to know who did this because they haven't done anything custom. They don't have their own custom malware. The only real signature here is the way that they're abusing built-in features. So I think that this kind of attack is really interesting because it's increasingly common to try to hide the source of the attack by using as generic as possible tools to execute it. And using tools that are built into the operating system is the ultimate way of doing that. So a really interesting and pretty sophisticated attack by this North Korean threat actor group, AKA Hidden Cobra.
Just on a random tangent, yeah, like about staging C2 stuff on like GitHub or driver stuff like that. The Dazzle Spy malware, the one that was like linked to Chinese state actors, was discovered to be like linking back to IPs that were like specifically owned by the Chinese government. It was also like specifically making requests to sites that like they owned, which is why it was like so easy to trace. So I just found that like ridiculous and messy.
Yeah. That's funny. Sometimes I guess people just don't care, or it's not important to them to obfuscate it. Like they just want to get the data as straightforward as possible, and also they want to be resistant against takedown. So the problem here is as soon as GitHub knows that they are a vector in this attack, then they're just going to shut down everything on their end, and it's going to be really difficult for the threat actor to have any control over that. So if you're hosting your own infrastructure, then it's a lot harder to take you down, but it is a lot easier to use your IP address as an indicator of compromise, or otherwise just blacklist it entirely and limit the traffic that can go to it. So there's arguments kind of each way for resilience versus just living off the land and being very stealthy. But I find that these state actors tend to, at least if they're smart anyway, they tend to make their attacks as generic as possible and using common infrastructure, like the Russian malware that was using Instagram photos with like steganography and like code hidden inside of it. It's just like traffic to Instagram isn't particularly suspicious, whereas traffic to like a custom IP address owned only by the Chinese government perhaps might be a little bit more suspicious. So if you're a network defender and you're looking at, like Bob's on his Instagram again, versus like, oh, Bob's connecting to the Chinese government, like that's a very different, response. And that's kind of what you get for trying to be sneaky and like taking the risk of potentially having your entire operation unrolled if someone finds out what you're doing. But yeah, very interesting use of this. All right, let's go back over to you.
Cool. We talked about QNAP for like the past 2 weeks and just like their weird response to whatever was happening to their network attached storage devices. Like first, something was happening and they just told their users to take their devices offline. But now it seems they've unveiled new attacks, ransomware attacks specifically being run against these devices called Deadbolt. Over 3,600 devices have already been compromised by this malware that's requesting, I forgot, some ridiculous amount of Bitcoin, but they're also requesting 50 Bitcoin, which I'm not sure how much that is, but that seems like a lot.
That does seem like a lot.
From QNAP themselves, in order to provide like a general decryption key for all the devices that have been affected by this new Deadbolt malware. But yeah, QNAP has also published ways in which you can bypass this ransom screen, since it seems like there's an exposed URL that you can just redirect to in order to gain access to your administration page again. But it seems like they've found a way to mitigate this malware and are pushing out forced installs. So if you have one of these QNAP devices, it seems like that's probably good news that they published a fix for it.
Yeah. So also I saw that QNAP just got frustrated and just force updated everyone's drives.
Right.
So like the fact that they have a force update mechanism and they're having these like problems with people, like breaking into these remotely. I don't know if I like that they have that force update mechanism, but at least they've updated them, because it seems like a lot of people didn't get the message on this and either got ransomwared or otherwise were about to have a very bad time if they didn't immediately update these devices. All right, so now we have a new segment, thanks to NSO Group, called People in Israel Getting in Trouble. So over on my screen, you can see that NSO Group is in the news again, this time for going after one of the directors of Human Rights Watch. So if you want to see what exactly happened with this, this is, oh, great, thanks Twitter. This is a crazy story of how the Human Rights Watch group was able to find out that one of their members had been infected with Pegasus spyware. And the specific person who was infected was the Crisis and Conflict Director and head of the Beirut office at Human Rights Watch. So what's always interesting about Pegasus spyware cases is like it's obviously one of their clients, and you have to figure out which one of their clients would want to spend tons of money to go after someone's phone. And apparently what's crazy about this was her phone was not just breached once, it was breached like 3 times. So this was also the very scary zero interaction attack, where basically they were leveraging the more expensive option that, you really have to piss someone off in order to have them buy, or just have a very rich enemy, I guess. The very kind of difficult to detect zero-click option, which would send a message that doesn't even do anything on the victim's screen. They don't have to click on a link. They don't have to interact with it in any way, shape, or form. They are just infected as soon as the tactic is employed against their device. Now, obviously, these get patched really quickly, so not that many people are attacked this way, and the attacks themselves are very expensive. So it's pretty remarkable that this lady got attacked like 3 times by a zero-click exploit, because these are very expensive, very sophisticated attacks by a very, very savvy threat actor. And yeah, this is very bad PR. Very, very, very bad PR. And of course, this is not the only people that have been attacked. The Finnish diplomats have also been infected with NSO Group's Pegasus spyware, which is, I wonder who would be interested in Finnish diplomats. So a lot of different governments, including, again, the United States and now the Human Rights Organization, are all reporting that they've been infected with the Pegasus spyware, which is certainly looking worse and worse for NSO Group as they continue to be put on blacklists and lose customers from the fact that they've become cyber mercenaries that are basically willing to rent out these weapons to any person who wants to attack basically anyone. So a lot of these people that are uncovering that they were victims are only uncovering this because of the exhaustive work by groups like Citizen Lab and also Apple going through and notifying people that have been targeted. And that was kind of the impetus for a lot of these people to have their devices checked out and then find out that, yes, they were actually victims of this spyware campaign. So do I think that the NSO Group is doing any positive thing in the world whatsoever? No, I do not. And this is further evidence that when you have cyber weapons that are sold by mercenaries to basically whoever will buy them with very little scrutiny and almost no oversight, you get lots of people who shouldn't have their information compromised with no due process and no real ability to defend themselves. I think it's genuinely making the world a worse place. Speaking of people in Israel making the world a worse place, we also have someone who did something that seems like it might be legal, except for one thing. So did you ever hear of DeepDotWeb?
No, I haven't.
So this was a Surface... Oh, why is Michael so excited? So this was a Surface website who... oh, it's because he... Okay, so... All right, so... So if you think that it might be a good scheme to have a surface level website that points to a bunch of illegal websites and then have like a kickback scheme you think no one's going to find out about where those illegal websites pay you for linking to them, you might have a bad time, because instead of being an incredibly smart scheme, it is actually a great way to end up in prison. So unfortunately, Tal Prahar, who was announced to be indicted yesterday by the U.S. Department of Justice, was sentenced for linking to these goods, which doesn't initially seem like it's a crime to just link to things that maybe have nefarious things going on if you're not participating. If it wasn't for the 8,155 bitcoins this guy thought no one would notice being transferred to him. If we thought that 50 bitcoin for the QNAP locker was a lot, 8,155 bitcoins is like the economy of a small country. So I don't know how this dude thought no one was going to notice this money laundering. It's just like the Canary Islands only have so many abilities to like launder your cash. So apparently tried to hide the money through various shell corporations and Bitcoin accounts. But the problem with the blockchain is anyone can see it. So apparently after this failed attempt to hide like the absolutely massive amounts of money, this dude, who I believe that Michael is currently calculating the total value of Bitcoin. Let's see, how much is it? I can't figure out how to make the font big.
$300 million.
$300 million worth of Bitcoin. That's a lot of Bitcoin. So I guess the lesson here is if you're going to do something that's just barely borderline legal, like barely just then don't proceed to do like a whole deal with the criminals to conceal $300 million worth of untaxed income. Really, that's going to piss anyone off.
Hey, what's the name of this scheme so I can make sure to totally avoid it? DeepDotWeb, all right.
Yeah.
I'll note that and never go to that site.
Yeah, never go to that website.
I'll definitely never host it.
Okay, all right. Well, if you do, then expect to be sentenced to how many years in prison? A lot. A lot. Oh, wait. Why is it this guy is being ordered to forfeit $8,414? That doesn't seem like. What about the other $300 million? I kind of feel like. Is this $8,000 worth of Bitcoin?
Wait, no. Did that say 8 million?
Yeah, it's 8 million.
Okay,
8 million.
good.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, all right.
That makes more sense.
But what about the other whatever? The math still doesn't line up on that. But 97 months in prison is definitely a lot for a pretty dumb scheme. So that concludes our segment, People in Israel Getting in Trouble. Back to you, Alex.
Nice. All right, this one, the FBI is warning about increased uses of QR codes just for malicious purposes, like redirecting to fake payment sites that actually go to hackers instead, or stuff like that. Because QR codes aren't like inherently scanned if you like embed them in an email or something by antivirus. Or you also just see QR codes posted up places for stuff like payment or even connecting to Wi-Fi now. So they're warning about the increased use of fake fake QR codes that are being patched over real ones that actually redirect to payment accounts for malicious actors or stuff like that.
All right. Well, switching back over to my screen, this is a tweet by the ACLU that I felt resonated particularly strongly because I attended a webinar of a company that was basically selling hacked data to law enforcement and saying, hey, if you want to be able to go after these cyber criminals or these other people that are creating accounts and whatever, we will sell you their breached data so you can do things like pivot off of their passwords and other things you would usually need a warrant to totally get. So the ways that these sorts of breached data or that this sort of data in general can be leaked, stolen, or otherwise compromised and then turn around and sold back to law enforcement agencies is really sketchy. And it's definitely worth noting that there are lots of organizations that do try to appeal to law enforcement and intelligence by giving them information that they normally would never have access to in a legal framework. So just something to keep an eye on if this is something you're concerned about, because I was not aware of how prevalent this was until I was invited to a law enforcement webinar where basically they were so excited to work with all this hacked data. They're like, it's like magic. And it's illegal. And when I spoke to some of my colleagues in other countries like Norway, they were just like, we would never ever be able to use data like that because it's legally impossible for us to take data that was stolen by criminals and then purchased by a company and then sold back to us. That seems like an obvious conflict of interest, and an obvious end run around constitutionality and needing to get a warrant. So this is something that a lot of organizations are upset about, including the ACLU, and it's definitely something to look into if you didn't know it was a thing that was happening, because brokering kind of gray market data is an increasingly lucrative industry, and there's not a lot of controls around how this data can be used. So personally, I was pretty shocked to find out that this was something that was very common for law enforcement organizations to seek out or even use. And although this data probably can't be used in charging documents or as evidence, it can be used to build an investigation or develop suspects. And it is not really open to very much scrutiny. So do I like this? No, I do not. And I think that these data brokers are sketchy because their data is fundamentally unverifiable. If you steal data, modify it to look salacious, and then sell it to one of these businesses who then turns around and sells it to law enforcement, you have basically unreliable data that's potentially getting people put into a suspect pool that then other circumstantial evidence could convict. I really don't think it's an appropriate place for police to be getting involved in purchasing data that's, again, totally unverifiable, using ways that are basically paying a company to buy it from criminals just to get around having to get the information yourself. Not a huge fan of this. Not a huge fan of this at all. All right, Alex, back to you.
Cool. So apparently an electronics supplier and, one of the biggest electronics supplier that funds stuff like Apple, Tesla, and other devices that contract out to them was affected by the Conti Ransomware, and they're asking $15 million to decrypt a couple thousand devices that were affected by this on their network. So this was a pretty big hit against this company.
Yikes, and probably against everybody that contracts with them as well. Considering
exactly.
Apple is a big deal, and they make a lot of software and hardware.
And they had to take down their site because it was affected by that, and they were apparently posting up some malicious stuff on their website.
Oh, yikes! So it might have even been a supply chain attack where they were trying to get people who use that service to infect themselves by going to the website. Sketchy. Yeah. Yikes. All right. Well, kind of not that much of a similar attack, but do you know what an OAuth app is?
Not really.
Okay, so OAuth is a standard that allows applications to request permissions to do certain things without getting the user's password. So there's supposed to be a way for, if you have an application that needs to do a certain thing, you can get the permissions of the user without actually, having to get their password, which it seems like a good idea. So this attack, which is named Oivavoy, I guess, is targeting company executives and general managers and is basically trying to send them a document that looks like it's an important thing that they need to open, and when they open it, it requests permissions that don't really seem as though they're an issue. So these apps have mostly been blocked by Microsoft, but there are still that are like validly signed by developers, which means that there might have been some sort of compromise like higher up here that allowed people to do this. And you can see that at least one of these is still available, whereas the rest of them have been blocked. But what happens here is when you try to open a document or what looks like a document that looks important, you get this permission request. And like you can see here, the document's counseling services. If you allow it, it's going to maintain access to your data, sign you in and read your profile, read and write to your mailbox settings, read your contacts and mails you, read and write access to your mail. That doesn't seem like too bad, and unfortunately some people have been accepting these permissions, and once you do, it immediately sends emails to everybody in your organization as you. And it will execute a phishing attack against basically anybody in your contacts that's a member of the same organization. So this is basically a shot at the top of the organization, hoping to get somebody who's so well trusted and unassailable that basically any email by them is going to be, you know, very, very seriously taken by anybody in the company. And maybe even if they have some sort of attachment like, these are the new strategic company rules, everybody read them or you're fired. I was like, oh no, I don't want to get fired. And then open it and then boom, you've phished almost everybody in the company. So this is still an active campaign. It's one that I think is pretty sneaky because the permissions that are requested here on its face don't really look that malicious, but the fact that it's going to abuse the trust that other people have in you to execute a phishing campaign is really, really smart. Because frankly, like that's probably one of the better things you could do, because the CEO is not going to have as much access as like, you know, the person who does all the IT stuff or like somebody else who might have the permissions you're really looking for that you could get to with a well-crafted phishing email from somebody that they trust. So very sneaky campaign. And again, this is mostly just leveraging human trust. If someone, you know, trusts this document to get all these permissions and then everybody in the organization trusts the CEO's email, then there's going to be a pretty big problem at this company. All right, you're up.
All right. All right, so there's a new attack that's being run against rather it's targeting Brazilian banks or something like that, rather a specific banking site that's accessible in Brazil. So people that, wait, what is this one? Oh, so when you try to access the site, it was apparently compromised and it pulls up like this Java installation thing that actually goes ahead and downloads software that communicates with a C2 server. And it installs a bunch of really sketchy extensions on Chrome that first of all redirects to a fake Chrome browser when you open up this site that starts logging credentials for other sites, and in addition to the banking login information. And then it also reports information about your system to the C2 server, providing them access to other vectors for attack on your system.
So by reporting back what your network footprint is, it can basically figure out what type of malware to like draw down based on that footprint.
Yeah.
Interesting. So finally, I think we're about to run out of time, but the last piece of news I have is, you remember I just said that the UK government was releasing Nmap script in order to find like what kinds of vulnerabilities might be on your website, and strongly recommending that businesses run that. Well, they're also just issuing a alert to brace for destructive Russian cyber attacks. So that could be related, possibly. And if you are a UK business, perhaps you should use that Nmap script to go through and make sure that there's nothing particularly glaringly easily wrong with your system before these potentially destructive Russian cyber attacks happen. And of course, this is a result of the rising geopolitical tensions between Russia and Ukraine and the UK getting involved in this. So if you are a computer in Ukraine or in the UK, you might want to make sure you get updated because it will possibly be a very rough month for you otherwise. Okay, I think that's just about all the time we have for today. Alex, thank you very much for joining us today. And if you had a question that we didn't get around to answering, or if you think we missed a piece of news, make sure to leave it on the YouTube video because we will go ahead and answer it on our live Q&A every Tuesday. Thank you also to Zam for the news and to everybody who was with us live in the chat. It's great to have you with us, and we hope to see you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.